The helicopter dropped Sergeant Elias Vance and his partner, known only as Ghost, a silent, wiry man whose eyes perpetually looked 10,000 yards away into the mouth of the A Shau Valley. The infiltration was messy. Standard procedure called for a soft hover and quick rope exit. Instead, they hit unexpected ground fire, forcing the pilot to execute a high-speed insertion, kicking them out from 30 feet above a tangle of razor-sharp bamboo and elephant grass. Vance hit hard, the impact jarring his teeth and silencing the roar of the Huey immediately, replacing it with a ringing silence that felt heavier than the jungle humidity. Their mission: identify the operational status of Tunnel 7, a persistent, legendary rumor of an NVA subterranean network used not just for supply, but perhaps for something far more strategically vital: a headquarters, or worse, a concealed heavy weapon emplacement. They had 80 hours to observe, record, and extract. Breaking silence before then was suicide, and moving was impossible. Vance found their chosen hide site, a natural spider hole formed by the gnarled roots of a dying banyan tree, barely large enough for two men to lie chest to back, facing opposite directions, immobilized. They slid in, their packs tucked tightly beneath their chins. The darkness was immediate, absolute, and thick, a physical smothering. The smell was the first enemy: decaying vegetation, wet earth, and the metallic tang of their own apprehension. Vance checked his watch one last time. The glowing tritium face a betrayal of their cover. 80 hours. He clicked the bezel cover shut. The waiting had begun, a cold war fought against the body and the mind, where the only casualty was time itself. The external danger, the NVA, was abstract. The internal enemy, the grinding pressure of absolute stillness, was concrete, immediate, and promised slow, irreversible erosion of sanity. Vance pressed his cheek against the damp earth, tasting the mission. They were now ghosts within the earth, and the 80-hour countdown to their extraction was a timer counting down to either salvation or madness. The first 24 hours were purely physiological agony. Every muscle in Vance's body screamed in protest against the forced stasis. He couldn't fully stretch his legs, his hips were grinding against the roots, and the heat inside the hole, humidity recycled by two breathing bodies, turned the atmosphere into a choking vapor. He measured time not by the sun, which he couldn't see, but by the relentless cycle of the jungle insects. The midday drone of cicadas, the late afternoon buzz of mosquitoes that somehow found their way past the netting, and the screeching symphony of nightlife. To scratch an itch was a major decision. To adjust position, an act of dangerous rebellion. Ghost, pressed against his back, was a metronome of control. Vance felt Ghost's slow, measured breathing, a perfect, steady rhythm that shamed Vance's own erratic pulse. Their communication was limited to micro-pressures. One firm press on the back meant enemy near, absolute zero movement. Two quick taps meant status check, maintain. Once, during the darkest part of the night, Vance felt a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor run through Ghost's back. It was fear, raw and instant. Vance froze, straining his ears. Faintly, through the roots, he heard the dull, metallic sound of something heavy dragging through the mud, followed by low, guttural Vietnamese commands. A heavily laden patrol was passing less than 10 feet away. Vance's heart hammered against the earth, a sound he felt certain could be heard above ground. He focused entirely on mirroring Ghost's breathing, trying to make himself chemically inert, dissolving into the soil. The dragging sounds continued for what felt like an eternity, confirming the intelligence. This wasn't just a trail, it was a thoroughfare. When the sounds finally faded, Vance realized his entire body was slick with cold sweat. They had survived the first confrontation not with firepower, but with sheer, inhuman patience. The true test of the next 56 hours wasn't survival, but the maintenance of that patience. The constant, unvarying pressure began to warp Vance's perception of reality by the 40th hour. He started categorizing the sounds above them with meticulous, almost obsessive detail. There was the routine patrol shuffle, soft boots, irregular rhythm. The resupply team drag, heavy, consistent footfalls with the scrape of metal, and the terrifying hunter's glide, a silence punctuated by perfectly placed single steps, often pausing directly overhead. He lived in a world of filtered acoustics and subterranean smells. He focused on the smell of his issued insect repellent and the faint, sweet scent of the small, desiccated root he had been chewing slowly for hydration. The boredom became a physical ailment, a dull throbbing behind his eyes that threatened to split his skull. He tried to mentally recall the face of his sister, his last girlfriend, the layout of his childhood home. Anything to ground himself in a reality outside this damp coffin. But the images kept fraying, replaced by abstract shapes and the oppressive blackness. The spider hole was a sensory deprivation chamber designed to make men confess secrets they didn't even know they possessed. Then, the undeniable sound began. A faint, low-frequency hum, constant and rhythmic, pulsing through the very bedrock. It wasn't a patrol, and it wasn't natural. It was mechanical, deep beneath them, suggesting massive power consumption. A generator, perhaps several. Tunnel 7 was not a dugout trench. It was an infrastructure. This realization, while vital intelligence, also cemented their extreme peril. If the NVA were operating something this large, they would be hypervigilant. Vance tapped Ghost 3 times, critical intelligence detected, and Ghost returned 2 taps, understood, maintain. The hum became the new soundtrack to their existence, a reminder that below the war they fought, another, larger war was literally grinding on beneath their feet. Midday of the 3rd day, the 55th hour, the psychological barrier finally cracked. Vance began to argue with himself internally, a silent, raging dialogue about the futility of their mission. We are 2 needles in a haystack that they own. Why are we here? His mind, desperate for stimulation, manufactured sensory inputs. He swore he could smell coffee. Rich, dark, chicory-blended coffee, the kind his mother used to brew. He visualized the steam rising, the clink of the porcelain mug, and the absurdity of the vision nearly made him laugh, a dangerous, hysterical impulse he quickly suffocated. He heard the faint, distorted sound of an American AM radio broadcast, big band music from the 1940s, fading in and out like a ghost signal. He knew it was the jungle playing tricks, the pressure twisting his neural pathways. His skin crawled with phantom insects that weren't there. He focused on Ghost, his only anchor. Ghost had not moved significantly in almost 3 days, existing in a state of zen-like endurance. Vance felt envy bordering on resentment for Ghost's apparent calm. Vance risked the smallest movement he had dared yet, a tiny shift of his hand towards his partner's canteen, ensuring his fingers barely brushed the plastic. Ghost's hand immediately moved, meeting Vance's in a silent, perfectly timed grip, releasing pressure, communicating without words. I am here. You're not alone. Control. The physical contact, fleeting and utilitarian, was a lifeline, but the paranoia was relentless. Vance began to suspect the generator hum was designed specifically to drive the listeners mad, a sonic warfare tactic. He worried that Ghost was dead and rotting beside him, that the steady breathing was merely the sound of decomposition, a biological process rather than a conscious effort. He forced himself to listen to the real sounds, the scratching of a rat nearby, the drip of condensate, to differentiate the true world from the manufactured horror of his failing mind. The duality was agonizing. The body demanded action, the mind required escape, and the mission demanded perfect, absolute, catastrophic stillness. The 68th hour brought the sky down on them. A tropical monsoon erupted with savage ferocity. The noise was deafening, turning the world above into a washing machine of wind and water. The earth, which had been their protector, now threatened to become their grave. Water instantly began seeping into the spider hole, mixing the fine red dust with muddy runoff. The temperature plummeted from stifling heat to chilling, swampy cold. They were now submerged to their chests in cold, silted water, their only comfort the small, waterproof bags holding the radio and mission-essential documents. The generator hum, however, seemed to thrive in the downpour. The sound actually became clearer, more resonant, vibrating through the flooded soil. Vance realized the engineering beneath them must be phenomenal to sustain such constant power during this deluge. While they were drowning inches beneath the surface, the NBA were perhaps eating hot rice and dry. This realization sparked a cold, professional anger in Vance, momentarily overriding the exhaustion. He pressed his ear against the root wall, trying to discern patterns in the mechanical pulse. It wasn't just a simple engine. There was a cyclical grinding sound, like heavy machinery engaging and disengaging, repeated every 3 minutes and 40 seconds. He memorized the rhythm, knowing this was critical intelligence. The rain lasted for 4 solid hours, leaving them shivering and miserable, smelling intensely of wet soil and fear. When the storm finally subsided, the jungle didn't return to normal. It entered a strange, waterlogged silence. The NBA patrols were temporarily absent, dealing with the aftermath of flooding, but the generator hum continued, mocking their misery. Vance knew they were nearing the crucial window. 2 more days of this were required, but the flood had compromised their immediate defensive posture, making the final hours the most dangerous. As the 78th hour approached, the critical juncture arrived, the predetermined extraction check-in window. Their small, sophisticated burst radio was designed to transmit a microsecond data packet with their status and current location. The rules were absolute. If conditions were too dangerous, if enemy activity was too high, they aborted the check-in and waited for the next window 24 hours later. Breaking radio silence near a known enemy installation was guaranteed death. Vance looked at the clock face inside the dark shelter, timing the 5-minute window. Ghost's hand, resting near the radio, remained absolutely still. The generator hum was still vibrating, and the faint, renewed sound of NVA chatter drifted in. They held their breath, waiting for the window to pass. Silence. Command would mark them overdue, perhaps MIA. But survival came first. Then, the rhythmic generator noise, the constant soundtrack of their confinement, abruptly died. The mechanical grinding ceased. The silence that followed was not the natural lull after a storm or a patrol. It was a profound, suffocating void. The jungle's usual background noise, the crickets, the tree frogs, the distant bird calls, did not rush in to fill the gap. It was an unnatural, pregnant quiet, signaling not safety, but an immediate, focused mobilization above ground. Vance felt a terror colder than the floodwater. The NVA hadn't stopped operations. They had initiated a massive, coordinated maneuver that required total acoustic discipline. This meant high-value movement. If they stayed hidden, they would miss the one piece of intelligence that justified 80 hours of suffering. The mission was not just observation, it was confirmation. The decision crystallized in Vance's mind with sharp, terrifying clarity. He had to see. He had to confirm what the silence meant. If the NBA were moving the alleged high-value asset, failing to report, it would cost hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives down the line. The 80 hours of psychological warfare had led to this single, irrevocable choice. He reached out and tapped Ghost's forearm 5 times. Emergency move, priority visual required. Ghost's response was immediate, a single, slow, hard press. Acknowledged. Extreme risk. They began the agonizing process of preparing to surface. Their movements, honed by weeks of training, were micro-calibrated, agonizingly slow, the opposite of combat speed. Removing the packs, securing the weapons, retracting their limbs, inch by infinitesimal inch. Fighting the muscle cramps and the stiffness that had seized their bodies. Each movement felt like breaking glass. Vance felt the blood rush back into his starved limbs, causing a burning pain that had to be ignored. He retrieved the specialized camera with its powerful telephoto lens and secured the wire cutter. He waited for Ghost to clear the camouflage netting just enough for one man to emerge. The clock was ticking not on their mission, but on their exposure. 90 seconds. That was his limit. He mentally divided the time. 30 seconds to ascend and stabilize. 30 seconds for observation and photography, 30 seconds to descend and reseal. Any longer was certain death. The ascent was a slow-motion birth. Vance pressed his hands against the earthen ceiling, pushing up against the root network, forcing his torso through the narrow aperture. The air outside was shockingly cool and carried the scent of pine and fresh-cut earth, not jungle rot. The sun, filtered through the thick canopy, was blinding. For a man who had existed in absolute zero light for 80 hours, the minimal daylight was a physical assault. He rose to a crouch, his M16 pointed down, scanning. The first 30 seconds were dedicated entirely to reorienting the senses. The jungle was truly silent, save for the slight groan of the wet trees. The ground was churned up, but not by a routine patrol. There were deep, wide tracks, unlike anything Vance had seen before. Not tanks, but something heavy on specialized treads. He crept forward, using the large, fallen trunk of a previously felled tree for cover, moving towards the confirmed location of the home, which was now unnervingly quiet. He reached the trunk, sinking into the mud, and brought his lens up, stabilizing it against the wood. The 90 seconds ended with a vision that shattered Vance's understanding of the conflict. Tunnel 7 wasn't a depot or a headquarters. It was an underground assembly plant, and it was being liquidated. In the clearing where the generator had hummed stood a massive, heavily camouflaged structure. Not a SAM battery, but a fully articulated, long-range mobile artillery piece, likely a captured 175mm M107 cannon or something similar, painstakingly rebuilt and concealed. The NBA were not preparing to fire it. They were preparing to move it, breaking it down into smaller, disguised pieces that were being loaded on trucks draped with foliage. But the truly chilling sight was at the entrance to the tunnel system. 24 NBA sappers, not soldiers, were moving with practiced, grim efficiency, mixing huge batches of quick-drying concrete. They were not shoring up the entrance, they were sealing it. Vance could see the faces of the tunnel workers, perhaps 50 men, standing at the entrance, pleading, shouting in desperate Vietnamese. They were being sealed inside Dash. The NBA were sacrificing an entire team of laborers and engineers, entombing them alive, simply to ensure that the existence and subsequent disappearance of the heavy weapon remained an absolute secret, untraceable and unconfirmable. The ruthless cost of this secrecy, the absolute commitment to operational denial, was a cold shock. Vance focused his camera, the lens shaking slightly with the adrenaline and the horror, capturing the concrete mixers, the dismantled cannon pieces, and the final, agonizing image of the tunnel entrance shrinking, the desperate faces disappearing behind the gray, viscous wall. The observation phase was over. The 90 seconds were up. Vance dropped back into the mud with a silent splash, the concrete mixer still running above him. It sounded a terrible punctuation mark on the deaths he had just witnessed. He slid back into the spider hole, pushing the captured images, the irrefutable evidence, into Ghost's hand. Ghost took the camera without a word, his eyes wide and registering the shock radiating off Vance. The descent was faster, desperate, fueled by the immediate threat of detection by the sealing crew, now working directly above their hide. Vance was breathing heavily, his mind replaying the trapped men's final, silent cries as the concrete hardened. They had the intelligence, catastrophic and vital, but they were compromised. The NVA had risked everything to move the weapon and silence the witnesses. They would be sweeping the area for the next 48 hours. The extraction window had been missed, the check-in aborted. The 80 hours were over, yielding 90 seconds of visual confirmation, but the mission was not. They were deep behind enemy lines, holding intelligence that could change the strategic landscape, and they had no way out but to walk. Vance pressed against the cold, damp earth, listening to the generator start up again. A smaller, less powerful one, used now only for the final curing of the concrete seal. The sound was no longer the soundtrack of waiting, but the definitive echo of men buried alive, a constant reminder of the war's true, ruthless cost. Vance gripped his rifle, knowing the escape would require a level of endurance and stealth, far surpassing the agonizing patience they had just mastered. The patrol had truly become a nightmare.